いいでしょう。の開始と。コース開始する。
Welcome to Front-End Web Development with React. This is the second course in the specialization on full-stack web development with React. We have already covered Bootstrap 4 in the first course of this specialization. In this course, we will concentrate on learning about the React library and also Redux for structuring our web application. I hope you have fun learning all the topics that we cover in this course. Before you get started on this course, let me make sure that you have sufficient background to be able to learn the topics covered in this course. I expect that you will have a very good working knowledge of HTML and CSS. Also, I would expect that you would have a very good working knowledge of JavaScript and be able to write JavaScript programs and applications. Now, specifically, at least, you should be familiar with ES5 version of JavaScript. Now, in this course itself, we will make use of the ES 2015 or the ES6 version of JavaScript, and we will use some of the new features that have been introduced in the ES6 version of JavaScript, including arrow functions and classes. Now, if you are not familiar with these, then you can learn these concepts along the way as we do the exercises in this course. Now, I will leave with the message saying your mileage may vary. Now, depending upon how dedicated you are, you could easily pick up these new concepts of ES6 as we go through this course. If not, I would urge you to quickly brush up on your knowledge on ES6, especially the new features of ES6 before proceeding ahead with this course. Now, also, we will be extensively using Bootstrap as a way of styling the views in our React application. So I would prefer that you would have completed the first course on front-end web UI frameworks and tools, Bootstrap 4, which is the first course in this specialization, before you proceed ahead with this course. Also, at the outset, let me clarify my view of web design and development. Now, I view web design and web development as two separate parts of the entire web landscape. The design aspect concentrates on the user interface or the user experience design, the visual design, the prototyping, the colors, graphics, and animation aspect of web application development. We will make use of the ES20 animation aspect of web application development. Now, in this course, we are concentrating more on the development, building, and deployment of web applications. In particular, we are concentrating on hard skills like the use of the JavaScript for developing our web application. So in the first course in the specialization, we covered Bootstrap 4. In this course, we will look at React. In the next course, we will look at React Native as a way of developing mobile applications. And then the final course will look at server-side development using Node, Express, and MongoDB. Now, in this course, as I emphasized, we are concentrating more on building up our hard web development skills. So design aspect is not something that we are concentrating in this specialization. So if you are approaching this course with the design aspect in view, then this course may not be suited for you. Instead, we are looking at developing hardcore JavaScript skills for developing React applications. Also, in this context, you may be wondering about full stack web development. If you have taken the previous course in the specialization, I've already introduced you to full stack web development. If not, the very first lecture in this course will introduce you to full stack web development. In this course specifically, we are looking at the JavaScript framework library approach for developing web application, and in particular we are looking at React. Now we will also look at React Native for mobile application development in the next course, and then we'll look at the server-side development including business logic layer and then the data layer in the last course of this specialization. Again, to emphasize, this course concentrates on the React library and the React ecosystem. We will introduce you to React and look at the various aspects of developing a React application. We'll also introduce you to React Strap as a way of styling the views in your React components. We will look at the use of Redux as a way of structuring the architecture of your React plus Redux application, and we'll look at the use of fetch for interacting with the server side from our React application. So these are the basic topics that will be covered in this course. Let's look at the detailed structure. This course itself is organized into 4 modules, each module typically corresponding to 1 week of work. Now, let that not be a constraint on your ability to learn. If you need more time than a week for covering the topics in each module, then by all means, please take sufficient time to understand the concepts and also understand the technology that we cover in each of the lectures. Don't be in a hurry to complete the materials by the deadline for the assignments. If you are unable to finish within this session, you are most welcome to move to the next session of this course. This course will be repeated every 15 days and a new session will start every 15 days. So when you move to a new session, all the work that you have completed in the current session will be automatically carried over to the next session. Now, with that in mind, let me cover what each module covers in this course. The first module will introduce you to full stack web development, the big picture view of full stack web development. If you don't know Git and Node, then we will have a quick introduction to both Git and Node in this course. If you have already done this as part of the first course in the specialization, then you can skip over that lesson. Then we will introduce you to the React, and we will explain how you can set up a React application using Create React App. And then we'll look at React components, how we can develop React components, and that should take you all the way to the very first assignment. The second module concentrates on the React router and single page applications. We will introduce you to various kinds of React components and what role they play in your overall React application. We'll look at React router as a way of navigating between various views in your React application, and then that'll take you on to the single page application concept. We'll look at how we can develop single page applications using React. And that should take you all the way to the second assignment in this course, where we will cover the React components, the React router, and single page applications. The third module in this course concentrates mainly on forms as a way of user input. We'll look at control components in React and how control forms can be developed inside control components. Then we'll look at uncontrolled forms, which are hosted in uncontrolled components in a React application. Then we will introduce you to Redux as a way of structuring your React application plus the architecture for your React application. We'll briefly introduce you to the Flux architecture, and we'll look at Redux as a way or as a variant of the Flux architecture and how you can structure your React plus Redux application. We'll then introduce you to React Redux forms as a way of leveraging the presence of Redux in your React application to persist your form data. That should take you all the way to the third assignment, where we will examine various kinds of React forms and also briefly Redux. The final module will examine Redux in more detail. We'll look at Redux actions, how we can set up Redux actions to change the state of our Redux store. Again, I'm throwing a lot of ideas at you. As you go through the course, you will learn more about these. Don't worry too much about all these terminology that I am introducing in this very first lesson. We will examine each and every one of them in detail as we go through this course. So by the end of this course, you should be completely familiar with all these technologies and terminologies that we introduce here. Then we will go on to Redux Thunk. And then we'll look at client-server communication. How will your React application communicate with a server that supports REST API? We'll look at the use of fetch as a way of communicating with the server. We'll briefly look at React animations. Then we'll look at how we can build and deploy your React application to a server, and look briefly at testing for your React application. That should take you all the way to the final assignment. I hope you have fun going through the various topics that we cover in this course, and at the end of this course, you would have a very good understanding of the React and Redux ecosystem. Once again, welcome to the front-end web development using React.
というわけで、とりあえずこんな感じでやりますってやつ。
Before you embark on this course, let me take you through a quick tour of all the learning resources that are available in this course and how best you can make use of these learning resources to maximize the benefit of doing this course. The course itself is organized into 4 modules. Each module has an overarching theme that guides the design of the module. A module itself is divided into multiple lessons, each lesson concentrating on one specific topic. There would be an assignment due at the end of each module. Each module typically corresponds to 1 calendar week of work, so this whole course could be completed in 4 weeks' time. But please take the time necessary for you to completely understand before you move on to the next module. As already mentioned, each module is divided into multiple lessons. Each lesson itself is organized in this manner. A lesson starts out with a set of objectives and outcomes being specified for that lesson. Then following that, you will have a set of videos that introduce you to the concepts and technologies on which this particular lesson is concentrating on. This will be followed by 1 or more hands-on exercises that will help you to understand the concepts and technologies by doing the exercises. At the end of each lesson, you will also have additional resources which will point you to resources that might be useful for the topic covered in this particular lesson. Let's take a quick tour of your course page. So as you go to the course homepage, you will find a lot of details about the course there. You'll also notice that the course itself is organized into weeks, each week corresponding to 1 module. Let's visit one particular module to learn how the module itself is structured. So as you go to each module, you will see that the module will have a brief introduction on the theme of that particular module. Then there will be a set of learning objectives for that particular module. Following that, you will have a set of lessons. As I mentioned earlier, each lesson will be organized into a set of items. Let's take a quick tour of this lesson on Introduction to React. So as you click and go into that lesson, you will notice that At the start of the lesson, you will have the objectives and outcomes for the lesson explicitly specified. I would urge you to take a few moments to read through this document, because this will clearly set up the goals for this lesson and also tell you exactly what you will achieve at the end of that particular lesson. Following that, you would have a set of videos that will explain some of the concepts and technologies relevant to that particular lesson. I would urge you to watch these videos first. Following this set of videos, you will have one or more hands-on exercises for that particular lesson. The exercises themselves will be illustrated through a video which gives you step-by-step progress of that particular exercise. So I would strongly urge you to watch this video in order to understand how to do the exercise. Also, in the exercise, I will explain a lot of details about why each step is being performed in that particular exercise. Now, in addition to the video illustration of the exercise, you will also have a summary of the instructions for that particular exercise given as a separate document following that video. The objectives and outcomes for that particular exercise will be listed out. Then each step will be illustrated briefly in this particular document here. So once you watch the video, you can also use this exercise instructions as a guide as you perform your own exercise routine. In addition, the exercise instructions will also contain code snippets that will be useful for you to do your exercise. I would strongly urge you not to simply cut and paste this code snippets. Instead, understand exactly what you're doing in each step and then either type in the code yourself or copy and paste the code from the instructions here. Furthermore, for every video, if there is a set of presentation slides, those would be available in the downloads to the right of this video there on the web page. Also, if you go to the additional resources that are provided for you at the end of each lesson, you will also have links to the PDFs of the presentation. So there are two places from where you can download the PDFs of the presentations about the concepts and technologies for each module. You will also have links to React documentation about the specific concepts and technologies covered in that particular lesson. I will also give you links to articles, blogs, or additional resources from the internet that might be useful or relevant to this particular topic of the lesson. I would suggest to you to spend some time looking up these additional resources so that they may aid you in also furthering your understanding of the specific topics covered in that particular lesson. To summarize, the learning resources in each lesson is organized into a set of video lectures illustrating the concepts and technologies, then hands-on exercises, which include both step-by-step instructions in the form of a video and also written instructions for the exercises, and additional resources that might be useful for you relevant to that particular lesson. Also, as I mentioned, at the end of each module, you will have an assignment due. The tasks to be performed in the assignment will be illustrated through a video where all the tasks that you need to do in the assignment will be shown to you. Thereafter, you will have a written document that explains the details of that assignment. This written document will give you access to the resources that might be required for this assignment. Following that, you will have the set of objectives and outcomes for that particular assignment given to you. Then the requirements of the assignment will be specified in terms of the set of tasks that you need to complete, and the steps for each task will be illustrated there. You may also be given a snapshot of the web page to show you the state of the web page at the completion of this particular assignment, with the specific tasks being highlighted in that snapshot. At the end of the document, you'll also be given the review criteria, the criteria based on which your submission will be judged for this particular assignment. As you embark on this course, let me quickly remind you of a Sanskrit subhashita, or a wise saying about learning. It goes as follows. Acharyat padama datte padam shishyah swamedaya sab brahmacharibhya padam kalakramena cha. What this means is that 1/4 of your learning comes from your teacher, 1/4 of your learning comes through your own intelligence. As you do the steps, use your own intellect to analyze and understand what you're doing. 1/4 of your learning comes from your classmates. So this is where interacting with your colleagues that are also taking this course at the same time through the discussion forums would also help you to understand the concepts. And finally, the last 1/4 comes only through experience, or only with time. As you learn and make use of the concepts and technologies that you learn in this course, you'll begin to understand more and more about this particular topic. Let me leave you with my best wishes for you, so that you would get the most out of your journey through this course. Wish you all the best.
音楽が。学習用教材はリアクト、コーセラーナ、サーチティランドセッション。チトゥングディファレント。コーセラサポート。まあ、これもいいでしょう。コンポーネントベース。まあ、終了として、で、実際の続きと、We'll start with the big picture, objective and outcomes. Present the big picture. The lesson gives you a big picture view of the 全体的な構図というか、and what is meant by full stack in the ecosystem. ウェブ開発でのフルスタックとどういう意味か。Distinguish between front-end, back-end and full stack evidence. それぞれのフロントエンド、バックエンド、フルスタックの違いを知る。And the position of this course in the course. で、このコースがそのどの道を占めるかを知る。なるほど。動画。
What is full stack web development?
ビデオ長え。
Let me clarify to you a few terms so that we start with a common understanding of full stack web development as applied in this specialization. We often hear people talk about the front end and the back end. The front end is where we are delivering the content to the user, typically in a browser where the user accesses the information. And this is where we use technologies like HTML, CSS, and JavaScript to render the content for the user. This information delivery is supported behind the scenes by a backend support, which is typically implemented these days using technologies like PHP, Java, ASP.NET, Ruby, Python, or Node.js. We often hear people talking about the 3-tier architecture for web development. In this approach, the entire web application is organized into 3 different layers. The presentation layer, which is concerned with delivering the information to the user. So this is usually the UI-related concerns that are dealt with at the presentation layer. The business logic layer, on the other hand, is concerned more about the data validation, the dynamic content processing, and generating the content to be delivered to the user. This is backed up behind the scenes with the data persistence layer or the data access layer. So this is concerned with how we store and interact with the data, typically in the form of a database, and access this data through an API. Exploring this further, let us see what is implemented typically in the traditional web development in each of these three layers. The business logic layer is usually implemented these days using technologies like Ruby, Python, PHP, Java, C++, or ASP.NET. This business logic layer is interacting behind the scenes with the persistent data typically stored in the relational database and accessed by the business logic layer. The business logic layer is also concerned with the rendering of information to the front side, typically in the form of server-side rendering these days. So the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript is generated on the server side and sent over to the client side in the form of a web page. In this approach, we need specialists in each of these three layers. So a front-end specialist typically would be well-versed in HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. The business logic specialist would be well-versed in one of the technologies that is used for implementing the business logic. And then you need a data specialist who will be well-versed in the relational database management system. There is an increasing trend towards using a single language to implement the entire stack, this being JavaScript. So you could have the front end implemented, for example, as a single page application using frameworks like Angular or React. You have the server side or the business logic layer being implemented using technologies like Node.js, which is also dependent on JavaScript. And then you have the data storage itself being implemented using technologies like MongoDB, which stores data in the form of JSON documents. And the information exchange between the server side and the client side is usually done using JSON as the format, and the server side supports a REST API endpoint. We will cover all these technologies as part of this specialization. So as you go through this specialization, you will see that on the presentation layer side, we will cover Bootstrap 4 and Angular or React for implementing front-end applications. Then on the business logic layer, we will be using Node.js and Node.js modules, and Express for implementing the business logic layer. We'll also consider backend as a service, and then the data support implemented using MongoDB.
Full stack web development. Additional. ちょっとフルスタック、今のところは、まあ、これは見せて、いいでしょう。次の項目。Setting up your Git and Node. On the end of this lesson, you should have guessed to Git and Node.js on your computer. You can skip this lesson if you have already completed this part of your earlier course specification. Similarly, you're able to Git based on platform-based Git operations. Git は基本しか知らないな。Use online Git repositories. Use node-based module to perform basic operations. これも大体やってる。そういったリクエアメント、テキストタブルやっちゃいます。ここは Visual Studio Code を使っているので、特に問題なし。ラケッツはもう分かってきてるじゃん。サブライムテキストか、あと。ブラウザを呼ぶやつです。Firefox 使ってる。I will be using Chrome as well on access. そうだよね。Chrome が安全だって話になって。Chrome will not all browsers will support all the same text. You might encounter problems when it is as long as you use this comparison on the experience potential. Unix の方がいいよねって話だけど、Familiarity with potential will be specific for your access. In Windows, Windows PowerShell with other privileges would be needed. A terminal window can be used. So get familiar with the serial command in also external Linux. Files required for the exercise. We require the additional status files for the exercise when needed. So down this file in the exercise instructions that follow to each exercise video. Please download the files placed there if any video. The links are also available below the other resource or specific link. レッスンの前のアディショナルリソースのところでファイルがダウンロードできると。それを忘れないようにってことですね。さて次。
Git is a very popular version control system for software. We need Git for working with our node.
一応、ここは、普通の一倍にしとく、表示するか。これで、英語の字幕があればね、なんて。
Ecosystem that we're going to use throughout this specialization. So it is important for you to get Git onto your computer. So let's go through a few quick steps to set up Git on your computer and then some quick commands to enable us to make use of Git in this specialization. I will not go into too much of details about version control and how Git works and so on. That is beyond the scope of this course. Instead, we'll just get some basic understanding of Git. Git is, as I said, a version control system. This is a software tool that enables us for the management of changes to source code and maintaining a version history. So as your source code evolves, you will be able to check in the code at different points of time so that you can always have a way of rolling back to a previous version in case your updates to the code doesn't work correctly. There are various version control systems that are in use in the real world, including CVS, SVN, and Git being a very popular mechanism for version control these days. Where did Git originate? Git was designed by Linus Torvalds, the person behind the Linux operating system. Git was designed as a version control system, a distributed version control system for use in Linux kernel development, and it has seen much wider deployment in the real world these days. The Node ecosystem is very much tied into Git, and that is the reason why we need Git for this specialization. Let's now move on to a few hands-on exercises where you will first set up Git, then you will learn a few basic Git commands, and then also understand how you can set up an online repository in places like GitHub or Bitbucket for synchronizing your source code from your computer to the online repository. This is obviously not a comprehensive tutorial on Git, but we will learn just enough of the commands that are necessary for use in this specialization. Let's now run through a few quick steps to set up Git on your computer. One easy way of setting up Git on your computer.
ここは、まあ、すでにできているので、ターミナルを起動して、ここはターミナルに切り替えましょう。でいいのかな？おかしい。ここを普通に1にして、で、ターミナル。ワークスペースのエデュケーションノーツがここのあれで、Git スタイル。make dir こうすれば、香港ユニバーシティはリアクト。そしてブランチを、リアクトを作る。すでに Git 入ってるから、ここで、make dir week 01は、第1週は、リアクトベーシックスとこう。あとはベーシックの続き。
is to go to this site called git-sem.com and then download
2016
the
年
Git
か。
installation files from there. So when you visit this website, git.sem.com, you will see on the right-hand side here a button for you to download the Git. If you want to, you can go directly to the
無料でいいじゃ
downloads
ん。
page here on the site, and then you will find the downloads for various platforms, and you can download the one for your specific platform for installation. This is the easiest way of getting Git onto your computer. There are other ways of setting up Git depending on your platform. For example, if you install GitHub Desktop on your computer, it'll automatically set up Git for you. If you're using a Mac and you set up Xcode, and especially the Xcode command line tools,
コードってとこ
that
ろ
will
が
also set
古
up
い。
Git for you. On this
だから
site,
無料でいいじゃん。
gitsem.com, if you go
Windows
to
な
the
作る。
documentation page, you will notice that there is a book here called ProGit. You can just go on to the Getting Started link. You will see a specific chapter here on installing Git. So just go to this installing Git site, and there you have more details about how to install Git on your specific
これもまあ
platform. So you can use any of the methods suggested here for installing Git on your platform. This is fairly straightforward, so I'm not going to go through the details of how to do the setup. Download the installer and run through the setup to get Git onto your computer. Once you install Git on your computer, start up a command window or PowerShell if you're using a Windows machine, or start up a terminal window if you're using a Mac or a Linux machine, and then at the prompt type in git --version to check what version of Git is installed on your computer. So on my machine,
2.9.3 うちはちょっと git マイナス 2. いくつだ 3.5.3 で、ちなみにここのスクープ使ってるからスクープでアスタリスクとやってまあ最新が入ってるよっていうことになるね。
I have this current version of Git installed, and that is good enough for me to work with. Once we verify that Git is installed, we will configure a couple of global identity parameters, the username and an email address, so that whenever Git does any commits, as you will learn later, it will make use of this information. So to do that, at the prompt, type git config --, global user name, and then you can type in your username.
どうすれば上下なるんだな。
The other parameter that I'm going to configure is my email.
email あ、なんか入るか。ホットメールなのか。
And to ensure that this information has been configured, we can type git config list, and then it'll list out a bunch of
エレベーターも入ってる。こうやってたら言いたい。まあよくあるパターンだな。ハウザーってなんだ？キーチェーン入ってる。ここら辺はうちの方もいろいろ入ってて、いや、エリオスカラーが入ってるし、シムリンクはとりあえずやるかな。オートシェル。インプットしてるはずしたじゃん。ねえ、メールか、Gmail、ワークリモート。デフォルトブランチやメイン、コミット、フィックス、グラフ、エイリアスが入ってて。あと、イニット、プッシュデフォルト。これが入っていると。
configurations that we have done. Some of these are automatically set up for you, but if you want to, you can set them up as you require. So here I have my core editor value set to VI, which is what I use to do command line editing of files. So with this, we have completed the setup of Git for use on our computer. Once you get Git on your computer, it is time to go and learn Git bit by bit.
だんだん慣れていきましょうということやね。Exercise. Original class. Exercise instructions setting up Git. Git を設定しましょう。In this exercise, you will learn to install Git on your computer. Git is required for using all remaining Node.js and Node-based tools that we encounter in the rest of the course. At the end of this exercise, you will be able to install Git on your computer. Ensure that Git can be used on your computer. The sum of the basic global configuration for Git. これも全部もやってるからな。ここら辺を使わない。設定 Xcode コンポーネントをそういうGit による。GitHub ディスクトップも使い入れてるんだけど使ってないな。グローバー。Git。ユーザーネームとユーザー E メールをだいたい入れてる。リストで見れる。これは全部やった。そして次。
Let us now explore some basic Git commands that are very useful for us in this specialization. There is a lot more to Git than what we cover in this exercise. To get started, go to your convenient location on your computer and then create a folder named Git test. Then open this folder in your favorite editor. Here, I have the Git test folder that we just created open in my Visual Studio Code. Let me add a file to this folder named index.html. Now you can see that I have added in some HTML code into this index.html file. Let's save the changes. Now let's switch to our command line. At the command line, go to the Git test folder and let's initialize this folder to be a Git repository. So to do that, at the command line, type git init. Now this folder has been initialized to be a Git repository. So this is our first Git command that we have learned, git init. This initializes the current folder as a Git repository. And when it initializes the folder, it will mark that folder as a master. This is the master branch for my Git. Now let's not worry about branches and so on. We will not deal with that in this course. We will only be working with the master branch in this particular specialization. So this would be marked as a master. Now this is the initial point of our repository. The next command that we're going to look at is git status. If you type git status in the command line, it'll tell you the current status of the folder. So let's do that at the command line and see what it shows. At the command line, type git status and read the information that is tapped out on the command window. You see that it says on branch master, so that is the master branch that we are on, and it says on track files, and then shows index.html in red. On your specific computer, it may be using different colors or represent this differently, but this is what it shows on my Mac. So now, this index.html file that we have just created in this folder is now not being added to our Git repository. So let's go ahead and add that file to the Git repository. So to do that, we say git add, and you can simply say dot, which means that all the files in the current directory will be added to what is called as the staging area of my Git repository. So now, if I again type git status, you will see that the file index.html is marked in green, and it says changes to be committed there, and then shows the file name. And then so that means that this file is now ready to be committed to my Git repository. So the next command that we saw was git add. By using git add, you can add file or folders to the staging area. So once you add it to the staging area, then you can commit that snapshot of our folder status to our Git repository. So that means that when you do the git commit, what this command will do is commit the current state of our folders into our Git repository. So all the files as they exist at the moment, once they have been staged using the git add, then they will be committed to a Git repository when we execute the git command. So at this point, when we execute the git command, then our initial state will now be changed to the first commit to the Git repository. So let's go ahead and do that. Back at the command prompt, let's type git commit, and then we can even add a message to our commit. So I'm going to say git commit -m first commit, because this is our first commit to our Git repository. So when I do that, it says, okay, one file has been added to the Git repository, and some other information will be typed out onto the command window. So let's now check again git status, and now you say that it says nothing to commit. Working directory is clean. So what that means is that the current state of my working directory or working folder has been committed to the Git repository. So a snapshot has been committed to my Git repository. Now I can type the next command called git log one line and see that it shows a number there, and also shows the message that we put into our commit saying first commit. So that is the log of all the commits that have been put into my Git repository. So going back to our next git command, we saw that git log --one line will see us a brief log of all the commits. If you simply type git log, it'll display a lot more detailed information about all the commits. But this is sufficient enough for obtaining information that we require. Let's now come back to our editor here and in Visual Studio Code. So I'm going to add more changes to my index.html file. So I will add So I've changed my index.html file. Now let me add another folder under the git test folder. So I will create a subfolder here named templates. And inside this templates folder, I'm going to create another file named test.html. This is just to show you how Git can commit entire folder hierarchy into its repository. So with test.html now there, I'm just going to copy everything from my index.html into my test.html and save the changes. Going back to the command line, let's now check out the status of our Git repository and this folder. So typing git status shows that the index.html file that we have already added earlier to the repository has now been modified. So there is a newer version of the index.html file. Also, it shows that there are some untracked files in this folder called templates. Let's add all these changes to our repository, to the staging area. So again, type git add dot. And then all these files will be added to the staging area. Again, checking out the status, you now see that the changes that have been added to the staging area. So all these files have been added to the staging area. Let's do one more commit. So I would say git commit -m second commit. And then let's check out the log. So if you check out the log, you now see that there are two commits in my Git repository, the first and the second commit, and note that each one of them is given a different number there. If you want to see the full details of the log, so you can type simply git log, and then you would see more details in there than what you would be interested in. So notice that the one-line commit only gives the first few characters of my commit number there. That is sufficient enough for us to operate with. Let me now go back again to my Visual Studio and then add one more line to my index.html file. So now my index.html file has been modified. And let's save the changes. Going back to the command line, doing git status shows that the index.html file has been modified. So let's add this to the staging area and then do a third commit. So let's say git add dot git status. Now you see that the index.html, the modified version, has been added. Now we can say git commit third commit and do git log one line, and you see that there are 3 commits in our repository. So now our repository contains snapshots at 3 different points: at the end of the first commit, at the end of the second commit, and at the end of the third commit. Now we also can roll back changes. We can revert the repository to a previous version. We can pull out a file from an older commit and then replace the existing file in our directory from the older commit. So let's see how we can operate with these things by learning a couple of more commands. At this stage, our index.html file is in the current state. So you can notice that it has an h1 and 2 p's. Let's now look at the next git command. The next git command that we're going to learn about is git checkout. So this checkout command allows us to check out a file from a previous commit in our Git repository. So if we don't like the current file that we have in our folder and we want to go back to a previous version of the file, we can always check out the file from a previous commit or from the current commit and then continue to work with that file. So let's make use of this and see some further changes to our Git repository. Going back to our command line, we remember that between the second and the third commit, I made changes to my index.html file. Suppose I want to revert back to the index.html file from my second commit. So then I can simply say git checkout 900 CF. So that is the commit identifier, the number that identifies that particular commit. And then I can say index.html. And what you would notice is that that older file will now be checked out into my current working directory. Going to my Visual Studio Code, you now notice that my index.html file has reverted to the previous version. So the change that I made before the third commit is now gone. So my index.html file has been restored to my its state at the end of the second commit. Now, at the command line, if I type git status, you'll notice that this index.html file, which has reverted to what it was at the end of the second commit, it has now already been staged. So using this git checkout, we'll pull out an older version of the file and then replace what is in the current directory, and then it'll also check it into the staging area. So now, if I do that and then I realize that this is what I want, I can simply do another commit at this point, and then that file can be committed as the fourth commit. But suppose I don't like this. I want to revert back to the index.html file at the end of the third commit. Then all I can do is say git reset head and index.html. So at this point, what happens is that the index.html, the modified version that I have checked out, is still there, but this file has been unstaged from the staging area. If you go back and look at the index.html in your editor, it will still show the state at the end of the second commit because we had pulled out the file using checkout for that. Now, if you want to revert it back to what it was at the end of the third commit, then we do one more checkout from the third commit. Going to our command window, type git status, and you would notice that the index.html is marked as modified, but it also shows this particular statement here. It says git checkout -- and the file name to discard the changes in the working directory. So that's one way you can discard the changes that you have made to a particular file corresponding to the previous commit. So let me restore this index.html back to what it was at the end of the third commit. So to do that, I will simply say git checkout -- index.html. And then if I do git status, it shows that my directory is clean, and basically my directory has been restored to the state at the end of the third commit. Going to the file in my Visual Studio Code, I see that the file has been restored back to what it was at the end of the third commit. So this is one way you can, if you have made changes to a file after the commit and you want to just discard those changes, you can simply check out the file from the last commit, and then all your changes that you've done after the last commit will be discarded at this point. So these are some basic commands that are very useful for you as you go through the courses in this specialization, because you may want to commit at the end of each exercise. And as you proceed forward, you will still have a committed version of the state of your folder at the end of the previous exercise. So that way, if you are carrying out a new exercise and you discover that you've made mistakes and you want to revert back to the previous commit, you always have a way of doing that using the commands that we have just learned. So with this basic understanding of these few Git commands, we would be able to proceed forward with understanding and using Git in the courses of this specialization. So now we have reviewed the git reset for a specific file or git reset in general. If you simply type git reset, it will restore you back to the last commit. So it will reset the staging area to the last commit without disturbing the changes that you have done to your working directory. So once you reset, then you can check out the previous version of the file that you have committed in the previous commit. So this way you can restore your folder back to where you were at the starting point of the previous commit. So sometimes when you are going through an exercise and you realize you made a mistake, you always have a way of reverting back to a previous version. So with these commands, I think you're all set to go ahead to use Git in the courses of this specialization. So at the end of this exercise, did you get it?
理由儀ってか、まあ、やりましょうってことだね。Qu'est-ce que c'est? Git テスト。グレードフォルダーネームの Git テスト。ムーブのウィーク01の、ウィーク01のディベロメントディベ MD や。そして、メイク DIR ウィーク01は Git テスト。で、すでにここ Git の指定入ってるから、コード。はいはい。ここの Git テストに、新しいファイル、index10.html を作る。あ、ここをリネームして、まあ、これもまあ、プラン通りなので、ペースト。そうすると、これは、ビューティファイ。いや、コードビルダーで、コードビルダーいいか。いや、コードビルダーを有効にして、HTML ボイダラブレードを有効にして、CSS サポートメチューを有効にして、リンターを
あの仕
有効に。
事は、あなたにしかできない。
仕事はしませんし、ないですよ、まだ。そして、ライブサイバー。これで表示ができる。でマークダウンをスペースしてから、オープンブラウザープレビュー。コードフォーマッターと。こんなもんかな。VTM 一入れるか。そこをやれだけやると、ここは、匿名のですね。これでオンヤープレートたら、This is header。This is header はね、そうすると、Git init は、まあ、この場合は入ってるからやんないで、当然、Git ステータスです。ST で使ってんだよね。は入ってないよと。これ追加すると、ニューファイルゼメテンですね。デブエンブが入りましたと。スコミットやめよう。そして、ここはまあ Git、コミット、アペンド、Git、エクササイズ、HK、OUR、Git、エクササイズ、ER サイズ。 コミット。オブ。いや、普通に日本語でいいよね。大として、インデックス HTML を追加。これはまあ普通にこう、セットである。そうすると Git、ログ。まあ、ログで見ると、このグラフっていうのは定義したから使ってみると、一番上だけだな。ヘッドメインのところに最初のマッチ追加っていうので、まあ、ティグでもいい。ティグで使うと、これ一番のところ、これが使ったっていうので、これね。そして、いい。これはコードのこっちに戻って、this is a paragraphというように、一行、テキストを追加。こうやってやると、一行追加されたから、ステータスでは、モディファイとなる。で、同じように、テンプレートを、えっと、えっと、ウィーク01の Git テスト。ここで、テンプレート作り、このテンプレートに新しいファイル。知ってるんだけど、ここテンプルテストといいな。表示しない。ないから、ここは。そして、ここで名前とテンプレートに対して、インデックスファシメと同じのをコピーして、ここに、ああ、これをコピーで、ああ、インデックスです。コントロール A の B、テンプレートにコントロール V、コントロール。そうすると、ステータス。テンプレートとインデックスのやつ。CD、V、こちらです。Git テストとして、あとの、現在のコンディレクトリ以下を追加。そうすると、ステータスに、ああ、この二つが、Git、コミット。本当は2行目でいいんだけど、やるんだけど。あと、X、大 exercise. templates をみたいにやっつけるわけですね。そうすると、ステータスは、もう全部ステージしちゃったからナッチングが進まなくなる。そして、もう一回さらに、コミットするように、1行を追加。あれだね。スラッシュ P と。そうすると、入ってないよとなるから、パッドとピリオド。テクスト AML に1行追加。というふうに設定できると。さて、ここでは OK。次は、コンテクストナンバーっていうのはログワンラインで、まず、git ログイコールワンライン。これでできるかなを、不一でやるとなるから、で、ここ、チェックアウト。マイナスもさらないのが楽やな。ギット、チェックアウト。で、テンプレートを追加。で、インデックス点 HTML。ゼロパス。そうやると、こっちが消えて、ここ日本にゲ。テストテンプレがこっちが違う。こうやって、違うな。git リセットマイナスマイナスヘッド。これどういいのかなこれで、テンプレートが追加して、インデックスシステムに1行追加。で、これをやるには、git アメンドを使おう。あれマイナスマイナスヘルプ。アメンドを使えとなかったっけあってましたな。そうすると、 2行。そして、git log、git 2行を追加して、ツイートすると、で、これで git log19 としよう。そうすると、テスト1行追加、テスト1行追加となっている。で、ここで、git c をチェックアウト。で、ここのアットの部分をチェックアウトする。で、セカンドインデックスシステムをチェックアウト。そうすると、インデックスが21、2行分のところが同じようになって、P の2行目が消えると。で、このままやるとなっちゃうから、これを消すには、git リセット。一番、ここをやるには、オンラインで見ると、ヘッドメインが21行追加のところになってるから、git リセットヘッド。これで大丈夫なはず。ヘッドでインデックス説明を手に下ろす。そうすると、コードは、変わらない。どうですかな ?git マイナスラインライン。ヘッドメインは変わってるけど、ヘッドをして、git co マイナス html。これで、マイナスでやると、ソースコードのインデックスのさらに元に戻ると。基本的なところができるようになりましたと。次の項目です。
Online Git repositories enable you to store a copy of your Git repository online, and it can easily be shared among multiple computers and multiple users. Let's learn about two of the online Git repository service providers, GitHub and Bitbucket, in a little bit more detail. We'll look at how we can set up our local Git repository to be mirrored in an online Git repository. There are several online Git repository service providers. Two of the most popular ones are GitHub and Bitbucket. I will go through in more detail about how you can set up your Git repository that you prepared in the previous exercise to be mirrored on an online Git repository on Bitbucket. To set up an online Git repository, go to one of these online service providers and then sign up for an account. So here I have signed up into my Bitbucket account and I have my homepage open here. And so I'm going to create a new repository online on my Bitbucket repository. So I just click on the create repository and then this would come up with some details. Now this varies with the repository service provider. So here I will specify the name of the repository as Git test and then I'm going to mark this as a private repository. For this course and all the remaining courses in the specialization, I would strongly advise you to keep your repositories as private repositories because you don't want somebody else to be copying the code that you might save in your online Git repository. So please make sure that you only use private repositories in this specialization. So I will sign up as a Git private repository and then
private
simply click on create repository, and then it'll do some setup and then be ready for me. Okay. Now, what I need to do is to copy this particular URL for my repository. So you will see a URL for the repository in the home page of the repository. So just copy that URL for the repository, because we would need that in order to synchronize our local Git repository with this repository. So I'm going to copy that. And since I have already created my local Git repository, I'm going to go in there and set that up to be mirrored in this online Git repository. So for that, we need to use a couple of Git commands that enable us to do this. Going to the command prompt in my Git repository folder, I will type git remote add and then paste the URL for my repository that I've just created. So now my local Git repository's remote origin is set to the Bitbucket repository. So now I want to be able to push the entire contents of my local Git repository to my online Git repository. So reviewing the commands for setting up the online Git repository, the first one that we just did, git remote add origin and the repository.
スターをブラッチにする。これはパターン通り。いかに。テストキット。ちなみに。そうすると、うちの場合は、すでにここを、ゲップしちゃおう。メインのままか。ですね。メインのままで今プッシュしたから、GitHub の読めるようにすれば、エデュケーションノーツ。ここのコーセラ、Git テストにインデックス説明の今入れが入っていると。この前ここが、待って。こういう場合、エデュケーションの Git and Watch アンライズエデュケーションのいいのか。セッティングそのところ関係ないし、全部大丈夫。ということで、
the entire contents of my local Git repository to my online Git repository. So reviewing the commands for setting up the online Git repository, the first one that we just did, git remote add origin and the repository URL. And so this will add the online repository and the remote repository for my local Git repository. Once I do that, then I need to push my contents to my online repository. For that, I do git push -u origin master. And this command would push the local Git repository to the online repository. So let's type that at the command prompt.
Push -u origin master. オリジンマスターは、さっきがったGitプッシュになるから。
Set up my Git repository. Sometimes it may ask you to type in your credentials, including your password, on your Bitbucket account. So you may have to do that. I had already done that previously, so that's why it didn't ask me again for the password. But once I type that in, then the contents of my local Git repository will be pushed to the server side. So now the data on my local Git repository is now matched on the server side. So let's go to Bitbucket to see the status of my online Git repository now. Going to my Bitbucket and then reviewing the online Git repository, you would see that there
ブ
has
ラン
been
チ1 ウォッチャー。
branch, the master branch that has been pushed to
マ
my
スターブラン
online
チあっ
Git
たんですか。
repository. I can then examine the source by looking at the source here, and then you can see that I have the index.html file, which is exactly the same as what I have in my local Git repository, and examine the various commits also. So I can look at the state in the second commit and at the first commit. So you can now see that all this information has been uploaded to the online repository, including the history of all the commits. Then going back there, you can see more details about all the commits that have been sent to the server side. I can examine each of those commits in a bit more detail. And then going back to the source, I can look at more details of the source like that there. So that has now set up my local Git repository to be mirrored in Bitbucket. The procedure is pretty much similar even on GitHub. So let me set up an online GitHub repository. Now, obviously, you have to remember that your local repository can only be matched to one online Git repository. So I will only go through setting up the repository on GitHub, and you will notice that the same kind of commands will be required if you want to set up your local repository to be mirrored on a repository on GitHub. So on GitHub, if you log into your account, you will see something like this in your home page. You can go to the right-hand side where there's a plus sign and then click on that to create a new repository, or just click on this button here to say new repository. And then when that comes up, I can simply say git test, and then again, as a reminder, please make that a private repository. Most of these providers allow you to now store private repositories online, so why make them public unless you really want to share it with other people? So I would strongly urge you to keep your repositories private for the moment, unless if you're working with a team. I should remind you that at this moment, GitHub supports private repositories only for those subscribers who pay for their GitHub account. So it is not available for subscribers who are using their free account. So simply click on private, and then create repository, and then that will create a repository. And then you would see that GitHub also gives me a bunch of commands here on how to set up the repository. So for creating a new repository on the command line, the commands that we actually had done earlier, or to push an existing repository, the same two kinds of commands that have to be issued. So that basically sets up your GitHub repository to mirror your local repository. So since I have already linked my repository to Bitbucket, I'm not going to use my GitHub repository for the purpose. So as you notice, the procedure is pretty much similar on either one of them. Give and take a few differences in the way the information is rendered on the screen in the user interface, and a little bit of changes. More or less, they are similar in the way you're going to make use of them in terms of mirroring your local Git repository to the online repository here. So with this, suppose somebody gives you a Git repository. Can you make a copy of that onto your local one? So this is where we use another Git command called git clone. So now here you see that I have this git test repository. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to this repository and then copy this URL. And then I'll show you how I can create a copy of the git repository or clone this online repository into my local computer. So let's pretend that I am on a different computer, and then we'll go to our command line and then create another repository with the same name. Going to my command line, I'm just going to move up into my, and you see that I have my git test folder there. So I'm going to create another temporary folder here, just to show you that I can clone an online Git repository. So in my temporary folder, you see that it is empty. So to review the command, it says git clone and the repository's URL. So let's apply this command and then clone the online Git repository, pretending that we are on another computer. So I'm going to say git clone and then paste the URL of my Bitbucket repository here, and then you would see that that repository will now get cloned into a local folder with the same name, git test. So now if I do a listing of the directory, you can see that the git test folder has been created. So let's go to the git test folder, and then you will see that this is an exact copy of the folder structure that we had created earlier. So this is how you can clone an online Git repository. So all you need to do is to obtain the URL of the Git repository and then simply use git clone to get a copy of that onto your local computer. With this, we complete this exercise on using online Git repositories. So did you finally get it?
これ本当に、香港かな、なんかそれインドの大学みたいな気がしてきた。Exercise instructions of online Git repositories. In this exercise, you will learn about how to set up and use online Git repositories and synchronize your local Git. やってみましょう。 そうね。じゃあ、ちょっと待って。ワークスペース。テンプ。ここに、ワークスペース。コーセラ、HQ、ウィークゼンのコンギットテスト。待って。そうすると、CD。ワークスペースのテンプ。Git テスト。こう一回イニットして、Git スティとやると、Git アット、ファースト、マイナス M。Git コミッティや。コミット、イニシャルコミット。で、この二つを抜ける。あと、追加して、ファースト、コミットを、プッシュ、オンライン、デポ。こんな感じでセビアですね。プログラム、オンライン。そして、GitHub に作ってみる。ニュー、Git テスト。ローカル、リモート、コネク、ユーズ、オンライン、リポ、セティオ、ポジトリーテスト。アットアリーダミファイル。Git 行くのは別にいらないかな。一応作るとしたら HTML だけど、やっぱない。Git 行くのはなし。ライセンスはこういう時は、ザ・アンラです。ザ・アンラですかなミットかなミット、いや、いつものミットでいいや。そうすると、ポジトリーを作ると、ライセンス、リード DM で、ここに、ここが、Git テスト、Git。Git、リモート、アオリジン、こうか。ここだな。オリジンとして、このスキットを追加すると、よっしょ。Git プッシュ、マイナス U、オリジン。 Git プルをしろと。Git プル。オリジンメリ。そうすると、Git st。Git リモート。オリジン。こういうところを一回やってみないといろいろエラー出るな。マイナス M。ここは Git プルですか。Git プッシュ。Git プッシュ。マイナス、フォース、オリジン。メインかなだ。フォースでメインって言ったということは、ここを置き換えると、両方が消えるんだよな。OK。ブランチ。Git テスト。1コミ。これしかないと。OK です。フォースで強制的なアップロードしたから、こうなったと。そして、cd rm-r git テストで、it is not empty ですか。rm- テストける。全部、こっちで、これが入ってたからか。別のプログラム。どれが入ってる？一回抜けてみよう。でも、デュークは関係ない。と、WT の AD です。Z コン、ワークス、RM、ES というのなんもないここに Git、クローン、テストと Git ってやると、です。Git パーテストが出てきて、インデックスと HTML、キャットのテンプレス、両方できるようになりましたと。23時間、これは関係ない。そうすると、クローンまではできた。
JavaScript, which was designed as a scripting language for the browser, has seen deployment far beyond the browser. Node.js has played a significant role in this shift of JavaScript from the browser to the desktop. Let's now learn a little bit about what Node.js is and what role does NPM, the Node Package Manager, play in the context of Node.js. Node.js, as I mentioned earlier, allows us to bring the power of JavaScript to the desktop. Node.js is based on the JavaScript runtime engine that has been built for the Chrome browser. So the Chrome V8 JavaScript engine has been ported from the browser to run on the desktop and support the execution of JavaScript programs on the desktop. Node.js is built around an event-driven non-blocking I/O model, which makes it very efficient to run JavaScript programs on the desktop, asynchronous JavaScript on the desktop. Now, this is where Node
要する
finds
に、
its
クライアン
true
トと
power.
リモートで、
Right
ロ
now,
ー
we
カ
will
ルで
examine
ローカル
Node.js
で
in the
JavaScript
context
使えるっていうのが
its
ノー
use
で
as
す
a
の
JavaScript
で、
runtime. We will look at the server-side application of Node.js in detail in the last course of this specialization. This is the typical architecture of Node.js. So in this, the Chrome V8 engine is at the bottom layer, together with libuv, forms the layer that interacts with the underlying computer system to support the execution of JavaScript programs. On top of it, we have node bindings, which is also implemented in C++. At the top layer, you have the Node.js and standard library, which are all implemented in JavaScript. And this is what enables us to write
そ
JavaScript
のうち
programs and run
C や
them
C++
on the
な
desktop.
ので、ラストや書
Naturally,
けるの
the
か
ability to
ね。
run JavaScript programs on the desktop energize the web development community to explore using JavaScript to develop a
グランと
significant
ガル
number
プ
of
が
web
古い。
development tools. Tools such as Bower, Grand, Gulp, Yeoman, and many others. We will explore some of these in the later part of this course and in subsequent courses. The last course in the specialization, as I mentioned, looks at the use of Node.js on the server side, how we can develop web server business logic all implemented in JavaScript on the server side. Together with Node, you often hear people talking about the Node Package
NPM.
Manager or NPM. When you install Node on your computer, NPM automatically gets installed. The
ノード
Node
のパッ
Package
ケージ
Manager
を管理
is
する、
the
まあね、
manager
これ
for
普
the
通
Node
使うけ
ecosystem
ど、
that manages all the Node modules and packages that have been made publicly available by many different users. A typical Node package consists of JavaScript files together with a file called package.json, which is the manifest file for this Node module. We will look at how we can use the package.json file in more detail in the subsequent exercises.
exercise。ノードジェストの NPM は、プロセッティングが
So
終
are
わ
you
って
all
るか
excited
ら、
and rubbing your hands eagerly to get hold of
さらっとやりま
Node.js?
しょ
You don't need to wait for too long. Let's just head over to nodejs.org and get hold of Node.js. In your browser, head over to nodejs.org.
う。うわぁ、古い。
And as you browse down, you see the download buttons for Node.js for your specific platform. In this case, it shows the download buttons for macOS. So click on the current version of Node.js. Click on that to download the installer package for your platform.
今は16なのに。
Once you get hold of the installer package, double-click on it to start installing Node.js. Depending on your operating system, you will see a window like this on your computer, and just follow along the instructions to install Node.js on your machine. You may need administrative privileges to install Node.js on your machine, so make sure that you are logged in to an administrator account and install Node.js to be accessible by all users that are logged in on the computer. And once the installation is complete, let's go ahead and verify that Node.js has been installed correctly. Open up a terminal window or a command window, and at the prompt type node -v to check the version of Node installed. Similarly, check npm -v to check the version of npm installed. I am starting with these versions of Node and npm, and the subsequent exercises will be based on these. Even if you install a later version, I'm pretty sure that it would be backward compatible, so all the steps should work pretty much the same. With this, we complete installation of Node.js. So let's go ahead and make use of Node.js in the next exercise.
開始。Exercise instructions setting up Node.js and NPM。Node.js と NPM の開発環境で作ろうと。Make sure you have installed Git on your machine before you install it. Let's complete the previous system 作った。Project and outcomes。どんなことをするか。In this exercise, you will learn to set up Node.js environment, a popular JavaScript-based server framework, and Node package manager on your machine. To learn more about Node.js, you can visit Node.js account for this course. でも、今はもっと簡便にできるので、やってるし。Complete set up Node.js and NPM on your machine. Way that you install successful on your machine is ready for using Node.js and NPM. 陰性ノードというのは Node.js からダウンロードして実行すればいい。Example, yield following a basic click on download button. Use install LTS バージョン入れた方がいい。Windows マシン、コンフィギュアパスを入れて、 実行できるようにした方がしないといけない。何です。このために、if you are using a window machine, approximate window は partial window with admin previous。管理者軽減で実行して、NPM とか実行できるかどうかした方がいい。この画面の ATS とかはちょっと古いからつって、入れて、すればいいよ。という話。さあ、実際やってみましょう。というか、うちはもう入ってるんだよね。ワークスペース、エデュケーションの、コーセラ、香港ユニバーシティ、ウィークゼロ。ここに作るとしたら、じゃあ、ボルタが入ってるから、ボルタを使ってインストール。JS。あ、LTS。ノードってですか？ノードでいいのか。そうすると、ノードマイナス V。で、NPM はすでに入ってて、ワーパックで入れているから、8.5。あれー、あれで、ワーパック、リペアのマイナスアクティベート。NPM、使わないけど 8.9.0 まで上げていきたい。あれ ?8.7.0 か。で、後のやつを合わせてオールでやると、でも、うちともメイン PNPM だから、セットアップ、メイク dir のノードテスト。ここで PNPM セットアップ、PNPM のイニット。パッケージネームは、ノードテスト。バージョンレディス。ディスクリプション。で、X でさえ。インデックス、テストコマンドはなし。イットリブドのスキップ、キーワードはなし。ライセンスは MIT と。OK。で、ENPM、インストール。なんも出るね。この辺はいいでしょう。で、今やったように、すでに NPM が8.5.0。ノードが、マイナス、ボルタ、EM、なんだって。ボルタピンノード。レーテストでいいかな？して、これをピン8.7.0。こうなると、ls、うん、やっと、ノードパーティシパ、AJS と、入ってない。NPM は、 0。濃度が最新の18になっていると。OK。
Now that you have Node.js on your computer, you're obviously wanting to immediately start using it. So in this exercise, we will start using Node. We will set up a package.json file for our git test folder that we had been working with so far. Then we will set up a Node module called as light server that will serve up the contents of our git test folder, and then we can browse this index.html file and other files in a browser. And we will also see how the light server will enable us to automatically see updates to our browser window as we make changes to our index.html file or any other files in our git test folder. The light server is something that you're going to extensively use in this and future courses to be able to see the changes in real time in a browser window as you edit the files of your project. As I mentioned, we want to set up the package.json file. So what exactly is this package.json file that we're going to set up? So here I have some information from the npmjs.org site, which specifies what exactly is the role of the package.json file. So the package.json file serves as a documentation on what all other packages that your project is dependent upon. So for example, when you set up the light server for your project, that will be recorded in the package.json file. So that subsequently you can also make use of that package in the future. Also, it allows you to specify which specific version of a package that your project is dependent on. So even if the package that you depend on changes in the future, you may insist that you want the user to install only a specific version of the package for use within your Node application. And also, it makes your builds reproducible, which means that when you share your code with others, then they can also do installation of all the Node modules, as we will see later in this exercise, on their own computer. So obviously, your next question would be, how do we create this package.json file? If you are starting a new project where you want to initialize the package.json file, then simply type npm init at the prompt in the project folder, and then that will take you through a set of steps which will enable you to configure your package.json file. So let's proceed with that for our git test project. So here I am in the git test folder in my terminal window. Make sure that you also open a terminal window or a command window and then go to the git test folder. And at the prompt, type npm init and then follow along the questions that are asked. So for the name of the project, we'll just leave it as the default git test. For version, we'll just leave it as 1.0.0. We can edit that later. For description, this is a test directory to learn Git and Node. It doesn't matter, type some description there. And then the entry point, I would just say index.html. Usually, if it is a Node package, the entry point would be index.js. Now, this folder that we have set up is a index.html based folder, so that's why I just type in index.html. Test command, nothing. Git repository. If we had already set up the Git repository in the previous exercise, it will automatically prompt that for you. If not, this would be empty and give you an option to type in the Git repository URL. In case you're using an online Git repository, some keywords for your project, which I'm going to leave blank. Author, type your name. Let's be narcissistic. And license. And then it'll show you the configuration of the package.json file in JSON format. So if you're familiar with JSON, this will look very, very familiar to you. So if this looks all good, let's just say OK. And then that results in the creation of the package.json file. So now if you list the folder contents, you will see the package.json file in the folder contents. Open the git test folder in your favorite editor and then take a look at the contents of package.json file in your editor. As the next step, we will learn how we can install a Node module using npm, the Node package manager. So we're going to install this node module called as light server. The light server will serve up the contents of this git test folder in a server that it starts up so that you can view the contents in a browser. Given that we have an index.html file, if we serve up this folder, then it'll be a website and you can view the index.html in a browser. So let's set up the light server and then we will see how we can make use of the light server to serve up the contents of this folder. This is very, very useful because if you're working on a web development project, you want to see the live version of your web development project so that as you make changes to your project, you can see the changes immediately reflected in the browser. So this is a very good node package that is very useful for this purpose. So let's set up the light server. To do that, add the prompt, type in npm install. So notice if you want npm to install a node package, this is how you're going to invoke it. And then you'd say light server. And then we also want to save the fact that our project is using the light server. So we will save this information in the package.json file. So to do that, we're going to type in -- save def. Now the save def option specifies that this light server is used for development dependency for our project. If you are installing a node module on which your project is directly dependent on, then you would install it by simply saying -- save option. So let's go ahead and install it, and you wait patiently for the installation to take place. It'll take all of a few minutes for that to complete its installation. Once that is installed, then you would immediately notice when you look at the contents of your folder, notice that there is a folder there created named node_modules. Now, if you go into the node_module, you will see a whole bunch of other subfolders in there which contain node modules which are necessary for the light server node module and so on. So let's take a quick tour of the node modules folder to see what the contents of these are. Going to my git test folder, if you go into the node modules folder, you would see, as I said, a whole bunch of subfolders there. Normally, you don't need to be venturing into the node modules folder. They just exist there because they are needed for the light server. So as you browse through, you should notice a folder named light server here. When you go into the light server folder, note in particular the presence of the index.js file and then a package.json file and several other things. So this contents of this folder comprises the light server node module. But this light server node module is dependent on other node modules to provide it with some additional functionality. So that's the reason when you install the light server node module, it will in turn install many other node modules on which the light server itself is dependent on. So that's the reason why you see that explosion of those folders inside the node modules folder. Don't be too concerned about it. The sum total of all this will not be more than a few tens of megabytes. So it is not going to fill up your directory with junk. This is all essential for Node to be able to help you. In case you're curious about the light server and how it works and so on, you can always go down to this GitHub site where the light server is posted and then look up the documentation for light server. I will introduce you to whatever you need to know about light server as we go through this course and the remaining courses. So you don't need to worry too much about it, but just in case you're curious, you can always go to this site to find out more details about light server. The link is provided in your exercise instructions and the additional resources part of this lesson. Once you have completed that, then head over to the editor where you have the folder, git test folder open, and then view the contents of the package.json file. So you would see that the package.json file contains exactly the information that you configured with your npm init. So you would see the name, version, and repository, author, and in particular, note this information here says dev dependencies. So, and then it specifies the light server, and also notice it says hat 2.2.2. So which means that this particular project depends upon light server that is at least version 2.2.2 or higher. So this is very useful for us. Now, why do we need this information here? Later on, when you go to the other exercises, you will notice that when you store this on an online repository, you don't want to be storing everything in your node modules folder. We will only be storing information of all the files that we have created. The node modules folder can always be recreated by typing npm install at our command prompt, and then based upon the dev dependencies and dependencies that are listed in the package.json file, all the node modules that your project depends on will automatically be installed. We will see that later on how to use npm install in this course. Now that we are at package.json file, let's make a couple of edits so that we will be able to make use of the light server to serve up the content. So right here in this option called scripts, let's add in one more here. So we will say start. So start is a command that npm supports, which enables you to specify a bunch of things that will be started. So later on we will see how we make use of this. So here I'm going to say npm run light, and after the test I'm going to add in one more entry called light, which I will configure as light server. Okay, with these changes, let's save the package.json file, and then now our project is configured so that now if you start the light server, the contents of your folder will be now served up in your favorite browser. Heading back to our command prompt, at the prompt, if I type npm start, now you see why I put that entry called start into my package.json file. So if I say npm start, whatever that start is configured as in the package.json file, we specified that as npm run light, and then light was specified as light server. So essentially we are saying start the light server. So once I type npm start, it will start the light server and it will serve up the contents of this folder. Now, how do you access the contents of this folder? If you want to access it locally, you will access it by specifying the URL as localhost :3000. This is the default settings for the light server. Furthermore, this should automatically open the browser window of your default browser and then show the contents of index.html in that browser window. Here you can see that I have opened my editor and my browser window directed at localhost 3000 simultaneously side by side, so that we can see how the browser window will immediately reflect any changes that we make to our files in the git test folder. So let me go to index.html, and then for the sake of space I'm going to turn that over, and then so here you can see that this is the contents of this. And then now let me add in one more paragraph. And save the changes, and then you will immediately notice that the change that I made to my index.html file is reflected into my browser. This provides a very nice way of being able to observe in real time the changes that you make to your code being reflected into your browser. So when you are working on a project, it will be very appropriate for you to be able to see the changes immediately. So when you make a change and then save the file, the modified code is immediately loaded into your browser, so you can immediately see the change being reflected in your browser window. This is a very useful tool while you are doing development of your project. That is the reason why I introduced you to the light server and set it up so that we can make use of it as we develop the website in this course. If you recall, we had already set up our git test folder to be a git repository. So checking again, we will see that we already have 3 commits in our git repository, and this git repository is already mirrored to our online git repository, which we have set up in the previous exercise, either at Bitbucket or GitHub. My git test folder is synced to my Bitbucket repository in this particular exercise. So what I'm going to do now is to show you how you can exclude some folders from your project folder and then make sure that they are not synchronized to your online repository. Now, as I said, the node modules folder can always be recreated by typing npm install at the prompt. So that's why when you upload the contents of your folder to an online Git repository, or when you do a commit of the folder to your Git repository, you don't want the node modules folder or all the subfolders under it to be included in the commit. So how do we exclude some folders or some files from our folder from being checked into our Git repository? So to do that, we will set up a file named .gitignore. So that's the name of the file, .gitignore. So to create this .gitignore file, we will go to our editor. So in the editor, in the git test folder, I'm going to create a new file and I will name it .gitignore. Note that the name begins with a dot and then the rest of the name is gitignore. So this is very, very important that you set up the file with exactly that name, .gitignore. So let's create this file called .gitignore. And the first line of that file we will type as node modules. So what this means is that the node modules folder is going to be excluded from So once I create the .gitignore file and then add node modules into the .gitignore file, let's save the changes, and then we will now do a commit of the current state of our project into our Git repository. I hope you remember your Git commands. Let's do a git status, and then when you do that, you will immediately notice that you have the index.html file marked as modified, and then the two new files, gitignore and package.json. So we do a git add dot, and then do a git status, and then you see that all these new files have been checked into your commit. Let's do a git commit. Git commit -m fourth commit, and the files are committed. Let's push the new commit to our online repository. So to do that, git push -u origin master. Wait for it to be pushed to our server. Now, if you go to your online Git repository, you will see that the package.json file and .gitignore would have been checked into your Git repository. Going to my Bitbucket repository for the Git test, you will see that when I look at the source, you will see that the package.json file has been added, the .gitignore has been added, and the new index.html file has been checked in. So that completes this exercise. So in this exercise, we have learned how to set up a package.json file using npm init. We have learned how to install an npm module, and we have learned how to use the light server npm module to serve up the contents of our project folder so that it can be viewed in a browser. So this is a nice way of serving up your web contents, your web application or your website, so that you can see changes in real time being reflected to your browser window. And then we also saw how we can set up the .gitignore so that some folders can be excluded from being checked into our Git repository. This completes this exercise. So with this, I'm sure you would have gotten a good handle on the use of both Git and then also Node and Node modules. Don't worry, we will be using Node extensively in various ways as you go through the courses of this specialization. This is just a start.
The exercise. Instruct the basics of Node.js on npm. Objectives ここの目的は In this exercise, you will learn the basics of Node on npm. On the end of the exercise, you will be able to set the package.json file in the project folder for configure your Node.js Node.js 用にパッケージ JSON を作成するようにできる。Inside npm project and make use of within プロジェクト内に np ノードパッケージがつける。また、このテストのタイプ npm init。これはこのアドアンサーでです。これでパッケージを作ることができる。Inside npm モジュールとしてライトサーバーをつける。セーブデブオプションをつけるできる。You can check the model on REST API. いや、一応開けとこう。ダウだな。大丈夫かな。グローバルインストレーションはまあやんない。ブラウザーシンクスを使っている。これはまあいいか。今は活動どうになるかって。スタートとライトでサーバーはやるかな。こういう風に作る。で、APM スタートでできるようになる。ですね。言っているのはこれギブを使えばいいから、まあ、実にやってるから大丈夫。じゃあちょっとやってみましょう。rm-r ノードテストで、git テスト。で、向こう、npm というこっちで pnpm イントとする。まずは git テスト。バージョンは 0.1.0 ですけども、git Node.js ベーシックサンプル。こんな感じでやればいいんですね。で、エントリーポイントがインデックス点 HTML に変わる。テストコマンドは別に関係なし。セリブスはスキップ。キーワードもスキップ。ライセンスは MIT と。あれ誤差はまあ、はいはい。そうすると、これでパッケージ JSON ができて、enpm, ins, アッドのローカルだから、マイナスセーブでも、ライトサーバーを入れる。うーん。そうだな。サーバー。はい、サーバーです。npm 簡易ウェブサーバーモジュール。これで出るかな。エクスプレスあるけど、HTTP サーバーってのあるんだ。静的ファイル用だからな。これ違うかな。まあ、両方やってみていろいろ試してみないとわからない。まあ、何も書いて、何もないと一緒や。じゃあ、ライトサービスでいいか。ライトバーサーバーとリゾルブして、PNPM 以下に全部、終わった。どうかな。そうすると、10スラッシュノードモジュール、bin スラッシュ、ライトサーバー。まあ、一行アクセスを許可するとしたら、入った。さて、コントロール C でクリアする。 できたから、コード、点々と。違うな。コード、点々スラッシュ点々だ。ここが基準になる。そして、パッケージ JS-ON の 2.6.1 ラスミットルカース。ここに、スタート。この npm で pnpm ランライト。いいのかな？これは、こいつは関係なし。そして、ほんまのライト。ほんまライトサーバー。これで、インデックスに入ってて、だって、ところで pnpm ランスタートと、プライベートでアクセスを許可。3000で Git テストができる。で、ここでさらに、サーバーテスト用に、事業追加。こうすると、ローディングブラウザーが発生し、多分、234、123。ブラウザーシンクコネクティ入った。ブラウザーシンクの S でやって、保存とすると、リロードが入って、ブラウザシンクテストが入る。OK。書き込めればそのままできるところですね。ということで、できるようになったので、これは違う。ここまでできた。NPM スタートで、というのは、これは、すでに、フィーラープレートで入れてあるから、入ってないじゃん。ロックは消しとけたい。イボはあるんだよね。イボ、ランプ、ノード、入ってる。よし。ここでコードの、削除として、コントロール O、エデュケーションノートの、ベーグラントはマークしていく。ゼネラルのプログ。ベーグラントが削除。で、Java があって、 ログが消して、Web モジュール TS-NPL-ES にスタイルインと、ノードリプレスアウトプット、ヤーン、インテグリティ、ドットエンブ、ネクステクストキャスシュ。検索しない。ロック YAM、ヤーン、PN、ダイナフェーズボックス。ネクストシステム、ビヤーン、インテグリティ。その名も、リアルキャッシュ。して、ロックファイルで、かける、6点かける。これでどうだ。こうすると、インデックスしてパッケージ JSON の時が入る。さあ、で、git、add、テンシャルス、点々、シャルス、点々。git、用、ベンド、コーセラ、スケプコン、Q ダッシュ、git、です。は、マイナスステージと、git スイッチ、やこと。じゃあ、いっか。git スイッチ、メイン。git コミット。ベンドのやこと。JS の初期設定。ベンドと、と、いるのは、に、チームのファイルをアンブラックするを追加と。で、いいのかな。ここまで行って、今回終了と。次の エクササイズの文字全部やってから、Git。全部は終了と。で、ここまでできたから、リアクトについては次でいいかな。時間的に1時間、2時間、2時間半まで進んだからいいですかね。というわけで、インデックス S の表示までできたので、表示までできたので、今日はここまでにします。あとは、夕飯とか食べてお風呂入ってから続きをやるかもしれません。ではでは。
ディスコンネクト。